The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes and on YouTube, and on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you're encouraged to post your comments, whether you agree with yours truly or not. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. I welcome you to the show. We have a lot of information to provide for you today, including breaking news out of Queens, New York. Queens is a borough of New York City for the uninitiated. It's where JFK Airport is located, and it is also where LaGuardia Airport is located. It's also where the U.S. Open is located, and it is also where a Joint Terrorism Task Force raided a number of homes today. And we do not have the details, but we do know that this is a pretty significant raid that occurred today because they are now briefing members of Congress. The leadership of Congress is being briefed on these raids. We're staying on top of it, and as we learn more, we will tell you about it. Well, two items in the news as well that we're going to talk about today. One has to do with the president's speech before Wall Street today, and the other has to do with the Tea Party protest in Washington, D.C., which of course has created yet another controversy because the estimates of how many people were in attendance have varied from 60,000 to 2 million. That's a pretty wide disparity. You would think that one could be a little more accurate. Part of the problem in estimating crowds in Washington, D.C. at protests is this. The U.S. Park Police used to do this as a matter of form. They would estimate based on calculations on how many people could fit in one space, packed as sardines, block by block, how many people were there. It was an estimate. That stopped after the so-called Million Man March that was put together by Screwy Louis Farrakhan because they alleged, the organizers of that march, that the park police purposely reduced the number of people in their count, so they stopped counting. So of course the media was no longer able to turn to the park police and take the burden of that count off of their own shoulders. And so some may be diminishing the numbers, some may be magnifying the numbers. Others say tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands so as to not be caught by trying to give too accurate an account and being wrong. Because you're always safe when you say scores or many or a lot of people or thousands of people. I mean, if you have a million people, you have thousands. If you have a million people, you have tens of thousands. So I don't know that all of the reporting was necessarily because of the political leanings of the various news organizations, but I will say that there's a huge disparity over the numbers reported. There were some complaints also that the fact that they felt that the coverage was fairly minimal, with the exception of Fox News Channel, that it made it pretty much a cause celeb, almost as if they were championing a news story they were covering. Sort of like the Hearst newspapers championing the Spanish-American War in order to cover it. So that is one item that we shall discuss today. The other has to do with the president's speech to Wall Street, one that we carried live right here on News Talk Online on Paltalk.com and noon New York time today. I took some fairly copious notes. The president said that the recovery, the economic recovery, is underway. By the way, he chose today and Wall Street as the date and venue of the speech because it's 1 year to the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed. He said the storms of the past 2 years are beginning to break. He said despite what has happened, some in the financial industry are choosing to ignore the lessons of Lehman Brothers and others. He said we will not go back to the days of reckless behavior, quick kills, and inflated bonuses. The American taxpayers, he said, won't be there to break their fall if this happens again. He says there's a need for rules. And he is proposing, and he claims to have a bipartisan congressional support, what he is calling the most ambitious overhaul of the financial regulatory system since the Great Depression. And he is pushing Congress to pass this before the end of the calendar year. I took 6 highlights from the ambitious overhaul of the financial regulatory system that the president is proposing. He wants to develop a consumer protection finance agency which would ensure that consumers not be coerced or misled into taking on loans that they clearly don't qualify for. He wants to close loopholes in the rules so the federal regulators can properly regulate the financial institutions. He wants the government to be given resolution authority. So if a financial institution that is too large to collapse, in other words, if it is allowed to collapse, would cause there to be severe economic harm to the nation, that the government would be able to move in and resolve the issues to keep them afloat. He says that he wants to close the gaps that exist in the United States and between countries. And as I suggested earlier during our coverage of his address, that's something that's certainly going to cause angst among many conservatives, that comment. Regulatory reform must be passed this year, as I mentioned, and he called upon Wall Street to voluntarily reform in order to restore trust. Now, it's interesting. He's saying things that we all agreed needed to be done during the end of the Bush administration and the beginning of his